Ever wonder why, with all our cutting edge medicine, chronic diseases keep climbing? Or why something as simple and ancient as herbs, used for thousands of years to heal, barely gets a mention in today's healthcare? You're not alone in asking. Today, we're uncovering a hidden truth that might just flip the script on how we think about wellness. Meet Jason Ott, a certified herbal nutrition health consultant with over 15 years of experience, founder of Empowered Prevention. He's helped thousands rethink health by tapping into nature's oldest remedies, blending a holistic approach that connects mind, body, and spirit. Think of him as the expert who's bridging yesterday's wisdom with tomorrow's possibilities. On this episode, we're digging into the big questions. Why are herbs sidelined in a system obsessed with quick fixes? How do diet, lifestyle, and pharmaceutical focus drown out their potential? And what can we learn from cultures where herbs still reign? Jason's bringing answers, plus practical ways to weave herbs into your life, and a vision for a world free of chronic disease. This isn't about tossing out modern medicine or chasing trends. It's about reclaiming what works and making it real. Ready to see health through a new lens? Let's dive in. Hey, Jason, thanks so much for taking the time to join me. Great to talk with you offline and get to know you a little bit. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk. I love the questions that you wrote down, and so I'm excited to dive into it.
You've done some amazing work studying harnessing the medical power of plants. You wrote a book. Uh, why do you think herbs, some people say herbs, right? Or I'm going to say herbs, maybe like a historical use in healing, traditional healthcare might sideline them a bit, particularly here in the United States. Why do you think that is the case, if you agree?
Gotcha. I do agree. And I think here in America, anyway, it's just not in our culture. Like when you look around the world and you see where, well, herbalism originated from, but also culturally speaking, that's usually the first line of defense that a household does. Grandparents, mom, kids. And so that's kind of built in of like, okay, that's where you start. And then if you need to, you go and then you go visit the doctor type deal. So it's like just over 70% of the globe is using both. Here in America, we're not. So I think there's a cultural aspect of we're not sharing this information and passing it down from our generations. And then secondary is industry. We're only one of two countries that allow pharmaceutical advertisements. So I do think there's a business part of it, even though I feel like they can go together. And that's how we like to use them anyway, at least in the clinic I'm at.
Exactly. I agree with you there. You do see, I think it's us and maybe New Zealand. I can't remember the other country, but there's like two countries, like you said, that allow the sort of advertising. And some people like quick fixes and they think, okay, this physician or GP is telling me, okay, I should take this. I saw them dancing on the commercial, right? So the medicine must be good. Like, you see that you're kind of inundated with it, so I feel like it's almost like a convenience where it's easy to get the prescription. It's your doctor's more than willing to write it most of the time, and they're not willing to do the research into herbs and say, like you said, grandma, great grandpa, whatever it might be, that was their first line of defense. Let's start here. And look, if we can't get a hold of it, maybe we'll escalate it there. But it's a shame that we kind of got disconnected. And I think reading your bio, like you sort of connected the maybe standard American diet and lifestyle to these high chronic disease rates we're getting. How would you say, like, how does this contribute to herbs being underutilized as a tool for overall wellness?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is we really only look at food as pleasure, and we're not knowing like we can still have pleasure from our food, but why don't we also incorporate the other things that we teach, when we have a newborn baby and a kid growing up? We're so worried about getting them the nutrients. They got to get enough sleep, hydration. Like they're not going to be healthy if we don't do it. But then as we get older, it's like, nah, food's pleasure. That's all it is. And like, we don't care about anything. So when we do that, we tend to forget that there's a cost if we are not going to eat the things that are good for our organs. And when you come into America, we have supposedly some of the best healthcare in the world, but we have the highest chronic disease rates. So something is going on that we're missing in our lifestyle. And I personally was, I don't want to say a victim of it because I made my own choices. It was my fault that I chose to eat and live the way that I did. But my original schooling anyway was more about aesthetics, even though it was, exercise science, its headaches and working on teaching exercise to people, there wasn't the first baseline education. Okay, heart disease kills 1 million people a year. This is how you should eat. This is how you should exercise. This is how you should live to prevent that. Because that should always be our first pillar. And then, of course, look great in your body and feel comfortable skin, right? But we just don't prioritize organ health first. We prioritize how we look, feel, and what we gain from it from like a pleasure standpoint.
And if we're eating for pleasure, and that's a great point, because I think that people, if you look again, going back to grandma, it was just kind of basics, right? They weren't, well, obviously they didn't have access to all of the crazy things that we feed ourselves and kids and at school or just at the convenience store. They didn't have access to those things, but they all seemed relatively fit back then and didn't have a lot. I don't know if a lot of these chronic diseases even existed, or at least at the rates they're at now. Talking about herbs specifically, what do you think that they were doing back then, maybe, that we could potentially be doing now to help, slow down what's going on, or like you said, try to prevent it outright?
Yes. My opinion around it, like, what do we have to do? The solution now, we'd have to be very intentional and change the way we live. But I think back then, if you see from like 1900 all the way up to where we are now, the evolution of not only industry, but affluence. So one of the best courses I took was a course, it was called Diseases of Affluence. And it went over as America became and had more in more industry. We had to work less hard as far as going out in our own garden and doing that. And it was easier to walk down the street to get whatever the hell I want to put in my mouth. We saw this shift start to happen where there were higher rates of these chronic diseases, higher rates of chronic pain. We had more deadly diseases popping up. And well, now in the last 20, 30 years, we have new diseases that necessarily weren't a problem 50 to 75 years ago. So I think it's this gradual change in how we live decade to decade. And each world war changed how we lived. When we started making processed food and the TV dinner in the 50s and then 60s, canned foods, all of these things naturally played on the human psyche of energy conservation, pain avoidance, pleasure seeking. So it's like we're a product of this ease environment and having more than we actually need. So we got to get back to like, they were eating for survival 8 to 100 years ago. So you got up and got your food so you could actually live well and go about your day. We have so much extra time now that it's like, what do you want to do? Let's go grab a bite and a beer. All right. So it's just it's a different way we live.
Yeah, it's true. It's true that it does become it's social now. Obviously, like you said, let's go out to the bar and watch a game, and it's just sedentary. You're just wherever you're going, it's sitting still, and then you get probably a valet to brings you the car, and you get in the right. You get home, you go into bed. You're not walking after you eat. You're not getting sunlight. You're just kind of sitting, eating, sitting, sleeping.
Pretty much.
What sort of misconceptions, maybe when you started in your career to now, what do you think still, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but keeping herbs on maybe the fringes of healthcare?
Well, you said something about the accessibility. Like, we see how easy it is. We see the person dancing on TV, and this must be an easy, good thing. And it's very easy for us to get. It's also, we're educated on it. And so I think that the first part of it is we're not educated around it, and we hear a lot of rumors, and there's not context. So what I'm going to say is this. We have different herbs. We have culinary herbs. If I'm going to give you 3 big categories. Culinary herbs, which people know those are oregano, thyme, basil. Okay, we know those are safe. We eat them. They're good. They add flavor to different recipes. Then we have what I'm going to say is like medicinal food grade herbs. So you've probably heard of like turmeric, elderberry, I love lemon balm, and astragalus, things like that. Those are going to be building the structure and function of organ systems just like food does for our cells in our body. Then third phase is toxic herbs. In America, those are outlawed anyway. If I was going to be an herbalist in practice and I went over to Europe, I legally could treat diseases, and I could use some of these more toxic herbs that work in low doses and very specified doses, just like medications. Here in America, we don't. But the number one thing we hear is the fear around them. well, don't do that. It could interact with this medication or it could cause this to have a problem. I'm like, haven't you listened to the side effects on some of the things out there? I'm pretty sure there's plenty of interactions and we live just fine. So it's like there's different categories. So there's a lack of context and education on what can be used. And just like anything, there's a safe way to do it and an unsafe way. And so you got to know the difference.
And do you think like maybe because maybe it's that whole big pharma, big bright corporation is kind of coming in to maybe limit the recognition of these herbs as an option? Do you agree that that's a potential? I don't. That's kind of how it feels to me. Like if these things are out there, they're proven history, proven success, other countries, billions and billions of people that live there. But I feel like it's almost limited here to a degree as an option for people managing specifically chronic diseases.
Agree, agree. And I think before anything, there's a competition, there's an ego around it. The way I look at health and helping someone is not an either or, it's an and. So understanding the time and place for each layer of our healthcare and our lifestyle is huge. And I try to write about it and explain that in my book of like, there's a time and place. And if you don't know the difference, that's where we get confused. Because a lot of pharmaceutical medications and some of the doctors I work with will talk to me about this was never designed for long-term treatment for 5, 10, 20 years. This was meant for 3 to 6 months to get you functional while you figured it out. So we're using things in place of where we should use something else. So the long-term support of the body is where herbs thrive. It's part of that lifestyle. But we will always need emergency medicine. So it's like we got to get away from this narrative around it's an either or. Because at least where I'm at, I mean, I don't know if there's a single client I've ever worked with that hasn't had to use both or be able to use both if they know the time and place to do it. So I think that there's just a lack of education on that of like how both can be used together and the time and place.
No, I like that approach, the and, not the either or, because that puts it in perspective for people, I think, listening. You do think maybe it's like us against them or you against whatever it might be with herbs or traditional pharmaceuticals, and admitting it and shining a light, essentially saying, hey, these can and do and should often work together. I think is a good way to sort of bridge that gap for people who are maybe, a little skeptical either way, right? A lot of
Right.
people are skeptical of medicine. A lot of people are skeptical of herbs, whatever it might be. But if they're complementary, obviously that can put some people mind at ease.
Yes, yes. And I think that's where a lot of my mistakes came in when I was younger. And even to the start of the question of when I first got into this, I was very hesitant because I've heard all these rumors and I was scared I was going to hurt myself. And then the deeper I got and the more I learned and found some educators to learn under, I started to realize that's like the complete opposite, actually. So
The more you start to dig, because again, we are a bit, shielded from it here in the U.S. And when you brought up other countries, I wanted to ask you. I believe you noted that some populations have lower rates of certain diseases that we might carry here in the U.S. more prevalent. How does sort of the cultural attitudes toward herbs in those societies differ from us here in the States, and what can we learn from what they're doing?
it's a great question. So I think about in one of my classes that I took, we went around like we have our My Plate or our food pyramid here in the US. Well, tons of other countries have their own. And so we had this exercise where we had to go through, it was like the top 15 different versions of this. And so you got to see what other countries and governments prioritize for a healthy meal and longevity. And so we, without getting too deep into that, they have tea and they have herbals on their menu. So like we walk into a restaurant here, hey, do you want a glass of water? And then you can order your appetizers, right? Let's say you go to Japan and you walk in, you're going to have an option for a cup of tea, just like we do our glass of water. Well, add that up over 70 years and thousands of gallons of something being drank with antioxidants and nutrition. That adds up when you compound it over time. So simple little things like that of just giving us that option as part of like the norm, we don't do that here. So like that was very eye-opening when I saw how other countries prioritize what is essential on a daily basis for nourishment.
I think, well, that's 100% right. Because even you can hear the argument with people that even you shouldn't have water, right? Like I talk to a lot of people that are into like gut health and digestion, and they'll not drink anything with their meals. They won't drink it. They'll almost wait 45 minutes post meal to have some room temperature water, So there's a lot of different schools of thought out there, but the studies show, that having the options and, like you said, the compound effect that we're not really offered. And it's such a simple thing to see, like a lemon balm tea. I love, certain things that most people wouldn't even understand, or like, what is that? And now you go to other countries and they're sort of, okay, this is just the norm when you walk into a restaurant. That's pretty amazing. And these people have been using these for thousands of years, because you mentioned like organs, nourishing the organ systems, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So these people in Japan, wherever it might be overseas, this sort of traditional role that they've been following in their societies, how does this compare to what you do in your integrative approach at your practice? Are you marrying the two, like traditional and ancient, or how does your practice sort of take the approach to this overall herbalism?
Yeah. I do. I try to. I try my best anyway to lay the options out. I think the easiest way I can explain it is using math is 3 plus 3 equals 6, 4 plus 2 equals 6. We can get to the number 6 multiple ways. So I'm trying to give informed consent to that person on all the options that can be a path to get them where they want to be. So I try to set it up so it's sustainable, it's consistent, and it becomes part of borderline an effortless lifestyle change for them long term anyway. So I try to give those options, explain it in context of what we're talking about in different countries and the why, and then from there have them select, well, that actually works for my lifestyle, or I'd prefer, maybe I only want to take herbs as capsules. Fine. If you want to only take capsules, go to town. Other people want and they love their tea. All right, go to town, have it every day, and make it the way you want to. So I try to take all of those things, present as many of the ideas that I feel fit for that person based on what they told me they want, and take more of an education to it and let them decide what's going to work best for them.
So when someone comes to you, let's just say, okay, well, you're working, because I believe you emphasize working alongside doctors, which to me brings it back to the and, not the either or, right?
Right.
So could you give us an example of like someone who's come to you that's maybe integrated herbalism with conventional treatments, and without obviously violating any privacy, but like a case of a Jane Doe that sort of shows how you marry the two?
Yes. I think it's actually easier if I take like somebody with an autoimmune condition, only because there's layers to that. I don't believe there's one cause for why we have things. There's usually layers. There can be deficiencies, environmental toxicity, pathogens in their microbiome, emotional stress. I mean, there's layers to why we end up where we're at. With that, if you're somebody like with a really bad Lyme disease or really bad rheumatoid arthritis or MS, depending on where you're at in your diagnosis, you're usually going to need some pharmaceutical interventions, right? And that can get you functional now, because most of these people have a job, they might have a family, they have stuff they got to do. So they use that. But then if you're trying to address and why this is going on, then you can start to dive into what's my long-term things. That's where the herbalism piece and food and lifestyle can really come in. So you can start to nourish up and build up the structures. There's certain herbs that have an affinity for the nervous system, the brain. They will nourish it. They will help give specific nutrients just to the nervous system itself. That's a pretty beneficial thing if you have MS, or if you're talking about rheumatoid arthritis, dealing with inflammation or joints. Herbs that specifically have nourishment that will help those to be stronger and function better. So then you can actually put those in alongside whatever medical treatment you are, and you can fulfill those deficiencies, remove the heavy metal toxicity or whatever it is, and start to change your lifestyle without being completely immobile, or at least hoping that you can do it before you become completely.
So almost like I guess root cause you're trying to get to, as the pharmaceuticals are maybe dealing symptomatically?
Definitely, because one thing that I've learned, especially working with some of the physicians, is all pharmaceutical meds deplete us of a nutrient somewhere. All of them. Doesn't matter what the condition or what it's for, because there's no nourishment in them. They stimulate a chemical response in your body. They have to get energy somewhere. So they're going to deplete it or take it from where they need it to create that. So as a perfect example, whatever med that person's on, we want to know what it's robbing from you, so we make sure we get that in your body so you don't end up with getting on another med to help out this med for that med. And it's that chain reaction, if that makes sense, to where now you're not in that horrible position 15, 20 years and you're in a more manageable situation.
No, that makes perfect sense the way you explained it. So for the people, like take it like when someone comes to you, are you running like panels with them? Are labs involved? Or like you mentioned, heavy metal, maybe testing, maybe urine testing. How does it work when someone comes and sits with you the first time? Obviously, every case is different, but is
Yeah.
there like a baseline of like, let's just kind of see where this person's sitting at nutrient wise, whatever it might be?
Yes. So personally, regardless if that person brings a stack of testing or not, that first time I meet, I really just want to talk to the person. So they've lived it. I want them to share their experience, how they feel they got there. They've been told a lot of things. They've been poked and prodded. So I want to hear what they feel, because mind, body, spirit, I think, is all part of the healing. Then, yes, let's see what testing you have. Conventional testing you get at your annual, great. Most people have that. But then did you do anything outside of just Western? Are you doing anything in functional medicine or alternative medicine? And then if not, I want to explain, hey, this could be an area you want to look into as an epigenetic factor. So I try to bring in other contributing factors from other people's cases that have the same diseases that they learned were beneficial to address. Share that with them, and usually a person, it resonates with them or not, where they're like, you know what, this happened to me, blah, 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 blah. I should get mold tested or whatever it may be to see what's going on in their body. So it's organic in nature, but yes, there's waves to that, is where I want to get through lifestyle, what everyone does medically, and then see what they understand about the other forms of medicine.
Yeah, that's great because I think a lot of people maybe feel going to the traditional, like you said, your labs once a year, or whatever the person does, and they get 3 minutes or 5 minutes with the doctor to check in. And it's right, like multiple, like you said, the compound effect of 3 minutes over 365 days is not very much when you're trying to get an annual health plan or whatever it might be that you're striving towards. But coming to you and actually being able to sit down and discuss, like you said, mind, body, spirit, it takes that approach to a different level that I think people are not really used to. I think that that's something that's missing drastically from our traditional healthcare system is just the listening and the conversation that you don't really feel like you can have with your doctor.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And that's clearly not working.
No.
So we need to find a way to. So with you saying that, that's kind of how I frame it up to the different physicians that I have started working with, was like, look, I know you're super busy. I know you have a patient load that's crazy. So if you want your patient to do X, Y, and Z, they can work with me and come see me once a month over the next 6 months, and I'm going to hold them accountable for everything you want them to do, and I'm going to also teach them this. And then when they come back to you, you can have a better conversation with your patient.
That's a great approach.
That's what we got to do. We can't not spend time with people.
You just feel like you're just shuffled in and out of there so quickly. Having that, again, I keep, because I really like how you took that and not either or approach. So how to work together and that they can both be very, very beneficial to the person. Is it fair to say that there are herbs out there that might be possible for chronic disease prevention and recovery? If so, like what herbs would they be? And I know like people listening, and it's not like, oh, if you take this, you're not going to get this, but are there more herbs that you find to be more powerful than others that sort of return the body to homeostasis? Is that fair to ask?
Yeah, it is. I think that specific answers to that are based on conditions and someone's situation, but I'm going to try to give you an example here of ones that can do that. So like lemon balm is one that is highly nourishing to our vagus nerve and our central nervous system. Vagus nerve regulates our flight or fight, our rest and digest. So stress in a nutshell. Well, we all have that. So if we can minimize and help our body deal with whatever stress that is, lemon balm would help. Adaptogenic herbs would help. Those help us adapt to our environment from chemical, physical, emotional, any sort of stress, so that the inflammation within our bodies can be somewhat less, right? To what degree, we don't know, but we know that that matters. There are other herbs that would build up systems. So astragalus is one that I mentioned because I work with a lot of cancer patients. Astragalus and different mushrooms are very interesting because our innate immune system, like our white blood cells, people don't realize they're not just there. They start in our bone marrow. It takes months and months for them to mature and get to a point that our body will even be able to use them. So it's like when you need your immune system to be strong, it started that process 6 to 12 months ago. So if you take astragalus, 5 grams, 10 grams, through the process of chemotherapy and radiation, which is perfectly safe to do, it will actually help keep your count up when you're getting off of your chemo and radiation, so that you're not in a big hole with your white count and your red blood cells as you're trying to be like, okay, I beat cancer, great, now what's next? That was a thing that we really noticed, like even in my mom's situation with cancer, is like she might have beat it, but man, there was a cost. Her whole body was hindered. So the quality of life after that was very minimal. And so those are areas that it's like, well, if you have an immune system that's weak, astragalus every day is a herb that you could do that would help you build and bolster that to the best of its ability. Will it prevent being sick all the time? No, but it could help not be so intense. So I think, yes, there are things that can do that to help stack the deck in your favor, so to speak.
No, that's great because again, every situation is going to be different and what the person's going through. I think sometimes people think maybe they go the other way. They're like, oh, I can just be this way. I can just take herbs and that's going to prevent everything. And it's like, well,
Right.
how do you feel though with the traditional healthcare system, right? Are there systemic changes that could be made that you think might be necessary to sort of embrace herbalism as part of getting our medical system to just embrace more of that holistic strategy?
Yes. So this is, I've not actually said this before on a podcast, but it's something some of my close friends we talk about, because this whole either or thing, it's a fight. Like, oh, they'll never let natural stuff come on because it'll take away their money. I'm like, no, it won't. There's tons of people that won't change. Like, we're still going to need emergency medicine, etc. The first pharmaceutical company that says we're going to have our own holistic herbal nutrition line and do that and say, this is how we use it, this is when we use it, this is how we use pharmaceuticals and when we use it, and they step up, I think it would transform everything. I don't think it would eat into their profits. I think they would make more money, because you know as well as I do, not everyone's going to work out. Not everyone's going to care to eat a certain way. I mean, we still got people smoking cigarettes, like, even though we know what they do. You know what I mean? So, like, human nature is still human nature. But if I was in charge of one of those, I would be looking around going, I see where everything's going. And I'm going to be the first pharmaceutical company to say, I want to do this and be the leader before anyone else. That's would change everything.
Do you think that that's the way though? Just getting just the one sort of pioneer in the big pharma to say, I'm going to embrace this holistic approach to, and that would sort of be the game changer to gain the public trust?
I think that it would be the start of it, because I think it's going to take leaders on both sides. Some of the most natural doctors saying, I get there's a time and place for uses of these therapies that so many people deem too toxic for anyone's body, or like the natural people that say that. And I think we got to do it together. So whatever the domino is first, that's going to start opening that conversation up to saying, you know what, that's right. My uncle actually did both, and he really did need both because X, Y, and Z. And then they explain that, right? It's like, then we can actually start to identify what that looks like. But someone's got to take the leap to begin that process.
Yeah, and I saw too in your bio, I believe you cite a lot of peer-reviewed research, science and technology, right? AI even, like a lot of people you hear are using AI just to throw their labs in, throw in some searches and some deep searches and kind of break down exactly what's going on. Because again, they might get that 3 minutes with their
Right.
maybe a nurse practitioner that calls them with lab results, right? Who knows? How do you see like science and technology as a way to sort of further invalidate the use of herbs in the future?
Well, at first, I try to sit back and watch first, and not judge it until I see it start to play out. At first, I was a little concerned about that with AI, but now that I've had patients who have a genetic mutation of some kind, and they go home and they use it to understand what that doctor was saying, because they use, 20-syllable words, then they could come back and they had better questions. We had a better dialogue. They could connect. That's why you want me to do this every day, because the doctor said this and this is and they could connect all the dots. So I think a part of it's going to help speed up the work it takes to educate yourself. to connect the dots. So I do think that's a big positive. We still have to realize it's man-made though, and we don't fully understand what it might be missing or not putting into context. No matter what an expert says, I'm always going to be hesitant of that. But I think it can help us discover what science hasn't discovered yet. Because there's a lot of things science hasn't figured out, and that's what true science is what's the next step then? If we understand this fully and we can prove it as a fact, how do we get to the next step? So I think it can help us advance a little quicker and understand things that might take 5 years to process from reading books and taking classes and doing things like that.
I like that because you have that one-on-one with the people that come to see you, and if they're able to arm themselves with more data, because I think a lot of people are just questioning everything especially when they're given a diagnosis, and they might get, again, 3 to 5 minutes with their physician, some time with you, but okay, there's still a lot of time in the week, in the month, and their heads racing. So having something that they can go to, and maybe if it's open source, they can see where they're pulling these PubMed, whatever it might be, that they can at least put their mind at ease. But again, coming more with the knowledge, and sometimes that knowledge gives mental power, and then they feel better about what's happening, and more assured on how they can take a hold on it and beat it, whatever they're going through. You vision a world free of chronic diseases. I read, obviously, I hope everyone listening does too. Like, you ever see herbs being integrated into preventive healthcare? If so, how long or what benefits do you think society might see if we started doing just that?
Like putting in prevention as a focus as well.
Yeah, I feel like there's other countries, I can't remember. Maybe it was Dubai or UAE, had they're more of a preventive system. I think I read, where we just deal with a lot of symptoms here. We're
Yeah.
not really addressing the preventive. And I wonder if you're marrying herbalism into that in a preventive way. Do you think that could sort of shift our approach to becoming more preventive?
Right. I do. Yeah, definitely. And I think the positive effect of it, life's going to be hard no matter what, whether you choose to focus on prevention now or wait until you get sick. It is 10 times harder if you just wait until it's the worst it's going to be before you make the changes. It completely derails someone's life. If you did have a passion, that's out the window because you got to focus on this. You lose time, and then spiritual and emotional focus go all over the place. So the person's whole life becomes focused on that, even though they spent most of their life avoiding the prevention to begin with. So to me, it's like that can help us evolve in a lot of ways, because now the person actually has health to accomplish whatever that is for themselves. And then that mental energy that gets freed up because you don't have to focus on that when are we getting put on meds, statistically speaking, mid-40s coming into 50s? That's a 30-year life. You're constantly stressed and in fear of a major health event happening versus taking things that can drastically reduce your risk of a heart attack or stroke, to where that's not something I really think about. If it happens, that's my fate. But I am statistically doing the things that mean I'm very unlikely to have one. If I do, then I'm like, hey, that's my spiritual fate right there, man. But those things, I have mental freedom because of that. And so, yes, do I discipline myself and I got to live a certain way every single day? Yes. But I love that mental freedom. I don't want to be caught up in that spiral just because I, want to eat a cheeseburger and drink beer every night. Just doesn't make sense.
How about taking the other approach, right? Because we've talked, benefits, but what about someone who's skeptical and maybe justifiably, are there risks involved with introducing too much herbalism into mainstream healthcare? Obviously, you mentioned some toxicity before, and certain categories, the 3 categories of herbs that you mentioned. Obviously, what risk could they be, and how can they sort of be addressed to ensure safety and efficacy?
Yeah, the one that concerns me most, and I try to really hit on it in my book, whether people realize it or not, is we have a tendency in our culture to take things to the extreme. So if we go from the extreme of pharmaceuticals to the most natural of natural, then you have Steve Jobs going on, where I refuse to do anything Western, and well, you're going to lose that battle too if you're just going to be either or, right? So I'm concerned about that, is we're going to go so far over here because we disagree with some of the downfalls of pharmaceuticals, that we're living in this ideological world of this has got to be the best for me, and you know what? Bad things can happen then too. So that's one big area because, like, my mom's brain cancer, there was no herb that was going to take out an orange sized tumor in her head. Like, that's surgery. We need to cut her open. There's not an herb we can put on there. But what we do from there, we can use that for. And then I would say actually understanding the contraindications of it, making sure, for example, like if you put a bunch of milk thistle and turmeric in your body and you're on a medication that's metabolized in your liver, well, you just shot that out of your liver and the half-life is going to be no good and you might need that at that time. So I think understand that the place and time for using them and why you're using them, that would be something that concerns me that we got to watch out for.
But again, I think you do a great way of just marrying the two. And I think that that's because there's so many people on one side, and I'm not going to do this because I don't believe in that. So I'm only going to do this approach. Like you said, with your mother, what do you say to the skepticism?
Skepticism
Yeah, just
of
of herbalism. Just like how do you like when someone maybe they're referred to you and they're sitting down with you and they're like, "Oh, I don't really get this. I don't really think this is going to help." Is it the approach of I'm not taking away what you're used to. I'm going to just enhance that with this.
definitely. So I definitely say that as like, well, I'm not telling you either or, I'm telling you and. So you can still do what you know to be true and then learn what I know to be true too. But like also I ask him the question back, what do you expect it to help with? Like what are your expectations around it? Because one thing that I see is people expect the herb or the natural way to give them the same result that the pharmaceutical way does. And so if they can verbalize that back correctly, that's a good thing. But often they're wanting that symptom gone and thinking this herb or that'll do it. Like, but that's not really the expectation you need to have. This is actually how this would play out over this many months. So I try to educate on what the expectation should be and why putting them together is such a good marriage.
I think you had like 20,000 hours of working with people or some
Yeah.
very large number. If you had to sort of take a lesson you learned about the role of herbs in wellness, could you put that into something for people listening with all that experience you have?
I think we struggle for control in general in life, but definitely with our health. And so with that is like this is something that's cost effective that you could grow in your backyard or in your house and it can give you some control back and some known when it comes to your health too. So it's like those things I feel like are exactly what people who are very fearful about their health don't do. The more someone, hey, I'm going to drink enough water, I'm going to sleep well, I'm going to go for a walk every day, I'm going to start eating this way, their fear comes down of the health outcomes. So for something that is so easy, that grows outside, that doesn't cost you a lot, it's like, why not? Because we've all seen the people that are that fearful and go through it. And I've been there before as a patient where you're like, you're terrified. You think your life's over. So for me, it's like, do the thing that helps quell that so you feel more comfortable because that ripple effect is huge in your life.
That's why I wanted to talk with you today because I was not as familiar with herbalism. And this has been, amazing learning all of this from you. If someone wants maybe like a simple, safe way they can start using herbs tomorrow in their daily life. Is it recommended for everyone? Like, can everyone use a little bit, or is it case by case, or is there a simple way people can start adding a tea to their morning, kind of thing to their
Yeah.
daily lives?
Yes. So all the culinary herbs, they're going to be labeled by our FDA, generally regarded as safe. So there's no known contraindications or problems they're going to cause for every person, right? So that's how you should look at that. So all the teas that you can buy, you got to look at your individual self, but majority of them, unless you have something very specific going on, that's an easy way. Almost every store has tea and tea bags there. So start with that. It's a tiny little bit. You're just drinking and sipping on some stuff. That is perfectly okay. So all the herbs that are regarded as safe, no different than an apple. Some people can't have them because of an allergy, but most people can. Test it out. Give it a whirl and see that it's not as scary as you realize. That's a very easy way to do it.
You did mention a book. What is the book about, and what can people learn by reading the book about you and your work?
So yeah, my book's called No Cure, No Problem, The Art of Healing. And I try to frame the mind up, the mindset And it's framed from, yes, my experience. Yes, my experience as a caretaker, a patient, professional, but what I've seen from the people that actually went in remission. So I get my day-to-day life, I'm driven by the people I don't help because it presents so many questions that I want to know why it didn't work for this person, but it did this person. But what I want other people to be able to do is frame up and then discover what their path is. In order to do that, I think it's very important to look at people who have achieved it and what their process was. So the testimonies in my book and the insights I'm sharing are solely from the people that actually overcame that stage 4 cancer or went into remission with Lyme disease. Or there's a guy in there with MS that, I mean, took him 4 or 5 years to get functional again, fix up his physical body. But I want people to see that process and what your mindset has to be around it. That's the only goal, because it's impossible to write a book for the specifics of every human on planet Earth. But I do think we can do a 30,000-foot view, get the right mindset, and then the individual person can go find the specific healthcare provider they need to make that next step.
And for yourself, though, like, do you work with people remotely? I know obviously you're based here in the US, but if someone like wants to connect with you and learn more about working with you and how to get your book, how's the best place to do that if you do work remotely with people?
Yes, I do. So I can hop on Zoom or phone call with anybody just about anywhere. Because once again, I'm just helping you create better questions. And you got to go get your healthcare support, whether you're in this country or another country or whatever state. Empoweredprevention.com is my website. You can find my book. You can find access to contacting me on there. And then at Empowered Prevention, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. That's going to be the fastest, easiest way. Books available on Amazon, so you can get it online just about anywhere.
So anyone reaching out, just it'll be in the show notes. But thank you so much for your time today. I mean, I truly did, learn a lot, because when I saw the topic, I was very, very intrigued, because I think you hear a lot about it, but I do wish it was, and I feel like it is becoming more mainstream with just functional medicine in general.
Mhm.
Thank you for doing what you do and what you do at Empowered Prevention. You have a lot of great videos on your Instagram, so I think people will gain a lot from just visiting that and being able to connect with you and work with you offline. So, but nice to meet you, obviously, and thank you so much for taking the time to just share all this with everyone.
Hey, and that's a mutual feeling. It's a skill to ask the right questions and help tell a story from somebody that you've never like met face to face. So thank you for doing what you're doing, because it has a bigger impact than what people realize.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jason, and we'll stay in touch and keep doing what you do.